There is a lot to tell, but I'm going to just tell you today a little bit and play you a little bit of examples from music that sometimes we call it Holocaust music, but it's not really Holocaust music. It's just really wonderful music that we should know. That was made, some of it was made by Jewish composers and some of it was performed by Jewish musicians in concentration camps. So the first thing I would like to ask you is, what kind of music do you know that has to do with the Holocaust? And Mr. Voskobornik just mentioned some of it. It's the music of the shtetls, the music of the little towns where the Jewish people were living, and they were creating their own music. Yes?
Maybe like klezmer?
Yes, klezmer music, songs that were written before the Holocaust and were performed and sang in concentration camps. But also there were a lot of musicians, that was their profession, to write and perform music. And they found themselves one day in a concentration camp. And you know how people, when you go on vacation or when you go to school, you take the things that are important for you. So you take your bag and you take your books, and sometimes you take some extra clothes. And those composers, what they took was, what do you think? What did you say?
Music.
Yes, they took, some of them were able to smuggle instruments without others being able to see. Some of them took pencils and pen and paper to write their music on. And some of this music had been lost, but a lot of the music survived. And so today we're able to play and even research this music and see what is the meaning, how did people feel while they were living in concentration camps and doing this music. But also, before I go on, I want to play you a piece that I think a lot of you have already heard. And that is a piece by a composer who was French, and his music was banned by the Nazis. So when the Nazis went in power in 1933, they decided to take a huge group of musicians and compositions and say, this is not going to be performed anymore. Why? Because some of this music was written by Jewish people, and some of this music was written by French people, and some was written by Polish people or Russian people, and all this music was not allowed to be performed during the time of the Nazi regime. So I'm going to play you just, I think, maybe a few minutes of this music. And I don't know if that's allowed, but if anybody wants to be near the piano, that's okay too. And it's a short piece by composer Eric Satie. That's okay. Now when you listen to this music, what do you think? How does the music make you feel? Kind of sad?
Depressing.
Okay. Anything else? Yes?
Well, it's kind of simple.
simple. And what did you want to say?
It's kind of it's kind of like you can feel someone expressing their feelings.
Right. And this is something that the Nazis did not want to be heard in music. I love your answer. So what the Nazis decided to do is take any music, such as music that makes people feel and think, and just take it away and not allow to perform or listening to it in public places. So that was one example. Now, the Nazis called all of those types of music that they had labeled as degenerate music. So any music that's written by Jews was considered degenerate because they didn't think that Jewish people are equal to Aryans. So anything done by Jewish people was just banned and not allowed to be performed. And they also created this poster. This poster was sort of an advertisement to all the bad things about music. And what do you see in this poster? Yes?
Monkey.
Yeah?
Like a Jewish star.
Mm-hmm. So what they had said was that not just the Jewish music was banned, but also jazz music, or music that was written by African American people, or the sounds of a saxophone, because they didn't think that the saxophone was sounding good enough to be considered an instrument that people should listen to. And now this poster symbolizes all the things that are bad about how the Nazis were looking at music. And so today, when we look at degenerate music, people like me and others who create music, we make concerts and we call them degenerate music. And we invite everybody to come and hear this, not really degenerate, but wonderful music that once upon a time some political parties decided that this music was not good enough. And this was the French composer I was playing before. Now I want to tell you about a very special place, a very sad place. But this place had produced a lot of music that is sort of like a memorial to what had happened in those years. So this picture is a picture of a concentration camp in Prague, which is today in Czech Republic, and it's called Terezin. So some had called it Theresienstadt and some had called it Terezin, but what you can see here is that it was built as a fortress town in the 19th century, or maybe even before. And the whole point for this place, at the beginning, it was built sort of like a resort, like a nice, fancy houses for the rich people. But this never happened. It actually became a prison for soldiers of the First World War. And in the Second World War, the Nazis had changed this to be a concentration camp and prison for Jewish people and other people who were persecuted during the Holocaust. So when you see those little buildings, you can see that if anybody had wanted to run away from a place like this, they were not able to, because all those green areas that we see here are part of the fortress. So it was a very, very large town that was built as prison. And this is a picture of the entire town. Now, if you are ever in the future going to Czech Republic, which is probably the place you would be going to is Prague, this place is about an hour away on a train. And this is a picture for one of the entrances. And do you know what this sign means? Let me see, someone who hasn't spoken before.
Work makes you free.
Yes, and this is, of course, not true, but it was used in many concentration camps at the entrances for the Jewish people to see. And a person named Alfred Kantor, who was a Czech artist, this is what he said about his experience. There were moments that seemed strangely magnified by a feeling of blissful make-believe amid an otherwise cold reality. I remember how overjoyed we were one day by the music of an accordion that someone had smuggled into the barracks. Everyone huddled together in the poorly lit freezing room, and for a while we forgot our hurt as we listened to the tunes. And Theresienstadt, despite being a prison for so many people, was also the place where they had concerts, they had education to children younger than you and your age, and as I mentioned before, composers who came there found the time to compose compositions inside while being imprisoned. Now this lady, her name was Ilse Weber, and she was a singer and songwriter, and she is remembered, this is what at least the testimonies that are telling, that she was playing and singing songs for the children. Now by training she was a singer-songwriter, but in the camp she worked as a nurse and educator. And I want to play for you one of her songs, and it's a lullaby. Can you hear well? And we can see the words in English of the song. Now I was going to ask you, similarly to what I asked you after playing the Satie piece, how do you feel when you listen to this type of music? But you were listening so nicely that I didn't want to distract you from the listening. So maybe someone who hasn't said anything so far, what did you think? Yes?
It made me feel like calm,
Mm-hmm.
really peaceful.
Yes. Now imagine singing a song like this in a concentration camp amid all the tragedies that people were seeing there and being able to listen to such beauty. And as I said before, I think that at least we're lucky today to have those songs survive so we can listen to them and even play them or sing. I'm going to go back to, I'm not sure what this means, so I will cancel it. So I'm going to go back and tell you a little bit more about the music in Theresienstadt. So this picture on the right, what does that look like? Choir? Yes, this was a choir. And it was conducted by a very, very talented young man. We'll see his back. His name was Rafael Schechter. And Rafael Schechter was a musician. I think he was also a painter. And he decided to bring together a choir in the camp and sing a very famous composition called a Requiem by Verdi. That was an Italian composer. And you know what Requiem means? Requiem is a type of music that is sung after somebody has died. It's sort of like a music that accompanies the person's funeral. or yes?
Like remembrance.
Yes, yes. And so these people that are singing in the choir were able to produce the concert, sing the entire requiem, and then days later they were all taken to be killed in the death camps. And there was a very nice movie that I think I can give you the information for that movie about how this requiem was made. And something that has to do with children like you. So 2 operas were written, composed. One of them was composed in the concentration camp Terezin, and one was composed before, but it was adapted to be sang by the children of the camp. And this one in particular is called Brundibar, and the composer was Hans Krasa. And Hans Krasa he was the person who put the music together, but there was also libretto. Libretto is the text that is put into an opera. And I forgot to ask you, do you all know what opera means? Who doesn't? Okay, whoever says yes, what is an opera? Yes?
It's like when everybody is saying something.
Mm-hmm.
It's no instruments.
There are instruments and singing.
It's a story told by singing.
Yes, so the story is, well, not completely, but mostly told by singing. And in this opera, there are a brother and a sister, and they have a very sick mother. So they are deciding to go and help her, and her doctor is telling them that they have to go and get her milk. So they have no money to get her milk, and they go and try to make music, but there is an evil person who is already doing the music, and he's trying to get them away. So they are trying to get him away, and they win because he was the bad guy. But I want to show you, well, that is in a nutshell. That's a very, very short explanation for what this opera is about. But I want to show you a small introduction. Now, when you were coming into the class, you were watching the video of this introduction. But what I will show you now is just the beginning of this opera. And this was done in English, so we're all able to understand it.
Everyone calls me Pepper Jack. I lost my daddy, now he's dead. This is my sister Annika. Our sick mother is home in bed. Doctor came in, the day was cold. He wore big glasses, he was old. He sat down next to Mommy's bed. With his cold hand he touched her head.
Okay, so the whole opera is about 40 minutes, and unfortunately we do not have the entire 40 minutes to watch it, so I will move on and tell you a little bit more about that music that I'm interested in. What I'm going to show you now, and this is something I have not mentioned before, that this concentration camp called Terezin, one of the reasons that the Nazis had made it so that so many musicians went into this camp, and also a lot of artists, they wanted to create a movie. And in that movie, they wanted to show how Jewish people are really treated. Because there were rumors that something was going on in Europe, but nobody really knew, or at least people or organizations and governments did not want to know what was going on. So the Nazis decided to create this movie and show as if the life of Jewish people in Europe were amazing. And this movie that we're going to watch now has a short example of those actual kids that were singing the opera Brundibar in Theresienstadt. And I think this should work if I click on this, and if not, I'll have to try another way. Let's see. Now it should work. Do not, of course I recognize this. I made it. Okay. So we're going to watch from about 4 minutes into this movie. Now, this actual movie, the person who is speaking here is speaking in Hungarian, so it's different than what we're used to listen to. But I'll scroll this forward a little.
Halott barátjának átoltak a lábai, és csak fekve lehetett rajta játszani. De ezekkel a kezdetleges eszközökkel is csodálatos.
And this was an orchestra performance in Theresienstadt.
A legnépszerűbb ezek között a Brunhilde című opera volt, amelyet Hans Kranz, egy szintén fogvatartó zeneszerző írt. Ez egy gyerekopera volt, gyerekek adták elő, tábor lakóinak között, akik meg tudták tanulni.
And those kids were all the kids that were imprisoned in Theresienstadt. So this is an actual historical movie. Now, did you see the boy with the big mustache? Who did he remind you? Yes. And that was what those people creating the show were trying to do. They were trying to resist what was happening to them. And there was a conductor here with an orchestra that was sitting underneath, and they were all producing this whole production in the camp. Now the whole movie is about 10 minutes. Which one? This doesn't go on. Okay. Now this is a painting by a child. Maybe, well, I cannot say if she was exactly your age. She was about 12 when she entered the camp, and her name was Helga Weissova. She survived Theresienstadt, and when she survived, she got out and she became a very prominent painter. But while she was in prison, in this concentration camp, she was making paintings of what she had seen. So when we look at this painting, what do you see? I haven't heard you before.
People are walking and the Nazis are
Yes. And Shu'el? Tali?
I see people with the yellow stars.
Mm-hmm.
People like walking ahead into probably the concentration camp.
Right, and they're taking their belongings. This is all they have, and this is what they were taking into the camp with them. Okay, and now I want to talk with you about my favorite composer. And this young man, his name was Gidon Klein. He was born in 1919 and he died at age 25. And the most fruitful time that he had, unfortunately, was in Theresienstadt concentration camp. And the music of Klein really speaks of what he had experienced in the camp. So I have a short piece to play for you by Klein. I will just tell you a few things about him. He entered the camp when he was 20, so that's much older than you. But what he had done, one of the jobs he had in the camp was teaching children. But he was also a very active figure in the life of the camp. So there were other composers, and Klein would go and tell them, you must compose, you must create music. And Klein had spent 3 years in the camp. And after being there for 3 years, he was taken away with many other prisoners to Auschwitz. And then he was taken away to another camp, which is where he died, but we don't really know how he died. We just know that it was just about the time that the Second World War ended. And one of the pieces he had written it's called a piano sonata. So that's a large piano composition. And this particular composition has 3 movements. And I'm going to play the second movement for you. Now, when I play that movement for you, I want you to think about several things. The music that you're going to listen is not the most pleasant music, but it is still music that we should listen to and ask ourselves, is the composer trying to say something through those sounds? Okay? So I will find it this is my folder of music, and the music always changes in this folder because I play all kinds of concerts, but this particular piece by Klein always stays in this folder because I happen to play it a lot. So this is the second movement of his piano sonata. What do you guys think about this music? Yes?
It was kind of like he was letting how he felt on the inside out through his music, because like he wasn't able to express it to other people because he might get caught. But
Right, right. And Tali? You?
It kind of sounds like the bad parts and like the bad things that happen right here.
Yes?
It sounded very dark.
Dark. And yes?
I also heard some like higher notes here and there, which kind of made me think like he, even though this might not have been the case, he might have been trying to like think more on the positive side, but it kept going back to negative.
That is very true. And unfortunately, I don't have that much time to play you more of his music, but some of his music was expressing happiness, and some was expressing horror. Sometimes he would take other compositions, other melodies, and put them in his own music, and then people will think, what is the meaning of that? But he definitely had a lot to say in his music, and I know this doesn't sound very pleasant, but it is a part of our history as it's expressed in music. And let me see. Yes. Well, before I talk a little bit about Hannah Senesh, I do want to show you a little bit from this movie. So this was, as I mentioned before, it was a propaganda movie, And what the Nazis were trying to do was to film this movie, and they had put all kinds of things in the camp that were non-existent before, such as playgrounds and food. And so what we can see in the movie is people who are smiling and children playing in the playgrounds, and there were actually little gardens in the camp, but the gardens with the vegetables were maintained by the Jewish prisoners to provide food for the Nazi officers that were working there. So we might, well, I'm not going to have you watch the whole 10 minutes, but some of those things that we see in the movie are simply not true. And the person who made the movie was another prisoner. His name was Kurt Geron. He was a very, very famous actor and director in Berlin, in Germany. But as the Second World War was going on, a lot of Jewish people had lost their jobs, and he was one of them. So after he lost all his jobs and all his high status as a very famous actor, he was taken to Theresienstadt, and he was commended to direct this film. So I will show you maybe a minute from that movie, and then we'll move on. Well, actually, I'm sorry. This is, okay, I'm sorry. That's my mistake. The movie, this is not a movie. This is a different video. That video actually talks about the music of Terezin, but do I have a minute to look for the movie? Oh, I guess not. Okay, next time. Okay, so I will show you this other movie that talks about the actual music.
They started taking people in November 1941. Czech Jews from Bohemia and Moravia were transported to Terezin by train, 1,000 people at a time. Terezin was administered by the Council of Jewish Elders. It was extremely well organized. There were departments for building, education, health,
And the music that we hear in this movie is also music by Gideon Klein
there
for
was an
strings.
enormous number of professional artists concentrated in that small place. Musicians, singers, conductors, composers, actors, directors even from National Theatre of Prague, designers, writers, and so the cultural life actually developed quite spontaneously.
What Terezin represents musically is a kind of a microcosmic world of virtually every kind of music you would have in a normal community. There was music to satisfy all tastes. There was concert music, there was operatic music, there were oratorios, there was Jewish music. And I think it's this tremendous spectrum that is one of the astonishing factors of music in Terezin.
The audience was extremely musical. All concert goers from Paris and Prague and Vienna and Berlin, and they knew the music, and even when they were ill, they came to this concert. And it was a remedy for us and for them.
It was the people that made the place. It was humming, and people were full of optimism, because that kind of situation where the people were together, creating together, was unique.
Okay, so to finish up, you all know Hannah Senesh. I'm sure you've studied about her. And the one song, well, one of two songs that we know called Eli Eli is a song that I wanted to play for you. And I was hoping that maybe you would also sing it with me. How many of you can sing it? So? Okay, my voice is not the best today, but I'd be happy if you sing it with me. I'm almost sure that you all know the story of Hannah Senesh. She was not a musician. She was, we know her as a poet, but she was actually a Hungarian woman who came to Israel. She made Aliyah. And when the World War had started, she wanted to go back to Europe and help other Jews saving them. And so she became a parachute, and she was unfortunately cut, and she was killed. But one of the memories that we have from her is one of these two songs, which is very much similar to a prayer, and it's called Eli Eli. So those of you who would like to sing it with me and not let me sing by myself, I would really, really appreciate it. Is anyone who wants to just stand up here and sing for everyone? Let me see, do I have any incentives? I have candy. Okay, so I think if nobody sings with me, I'm just going to play the melody. So I'll do everything on the piano. It's early in the morning, so if I stay here another 2 hours, I can sing more. But this is what I have for you today. Do you have any questions? Yes?
So,
Can you just tell me your name?
Brooke.
Brooke?
So what kinds of other music was played there? Like, did they play, because I know you said they didn't necessarily like jazz as much. Like, what did they end up with?
They had an orchestra, and in the movie that I had shown you just earlier today, we could see the orchestra playing there. So a composer named Pavel Haas wrote music that the orchestra was able to play. They had those two operas. There was another composer named Victor Ullmann, and I have a whole story about Ullmann, but Ullmann actually spent most of his time while being in prison writing sonatas for piano and string quartet. He also wrote an opera called The Kaiser von Atlantis. He wrote, well, Pavel Haas also wrote a piece for piano and oboe. Klein wrote music for strings, he wrote songs, he arranged. So they had shows in the camp, and because there were not always many instruments to play, some of the music had to only be played on piano. So Klein, for example, took scores or whatever he remembered, and he would just write it just for piano to play, almost as the piano was the entire orchestra. There were a lot of children's songs, and I know of one piano that was very broken, but they were able to play on it. So does that answer the question?
like to thank you very, very much. It was informative and inspiring.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Let's let the fifth grade follow Miss